What's up everyone? In today's episode we are going to be focusing on character movement for our new RPG game. So let's get started, and you're going to want to open up Unity and you're going to create a new project. So we're going to be making a 2D game, but you can apply a lot of these concepts to 3D if you want. Let's name it something appropriate. Let's say RPG series. YouTube. Alright, so we have our project open, and the first thing we need to do is have our character. I just found a sprite sheet online. I'm using this. And I'm just gonna put it in a folder real quick. Call it like, let's say 2D assets. Let's make another folder, call it characters. So I'm not going to go too far in depth with organization. I'm just have pretty light organization. For your project, you probably want to organize a lot more than me. So first thing, because we're going to do like a pixel style game, we're going to change this pixel per unit to 32. We're going to change this probably to something like that. And compression to none, bilinear to point. And so we're going to change this to multiple and go into the sprite editor, and we're just going to do automatic. I think that it will be fine with this specifically. And now we have all of our little links here. And so let me just show you what all those settings just did. So he looks fine now, but if I didn't do that, let's change this back to 100, which is the default. He gets much smaller. So I'm going to change it to 32 so it has a bigger pixel per unit size. If I had this to bilinear, you see how blurry it gets, because it tries to smoothen out the edges. But because we're doing pixel art, we don't want to do that. And because we're using pixel art, we don't really need high quality textures, so that's why we set the compression to none. Alright, so this is going to be our main character. Let's call it GFX. Then we're going to put it inside of another game object and call it player. And the reason why we separate these is because we're probably going to be putting our scripts on our this game object, and the reason why you don't want to put it on our graphics is because what if we want to disable this object, then all the scripts on it are going to get deleted along with it. So now that we have our player set up, we can do some pretty light coding. So let's create another folder, call it scripts. And let's make another folder and call it player scripts. And then we'll create another C# and call it player movement. And you typically want to separate all of your different player scripts into different scripts, because let's say you had player attack, player movement, player stats all in one script, it could get really big and messy. So I like to start with an empty template. Alright, so first thing we need is an update function that we just deleted, but we're going to bring it back. And we're basically going to be focusing on the movement only right now. So we're going to do vector 2. We're going to call this movement equal to new vector 2. We're going to say input dot get access raw. We're going to put in horizontal. Add a comma and put input get axis raw. Then we're going to add vertical. Before I explain that, I'm just going to set it up first. So then we need a rigid body, 2D. We can call it our body. Actually, we'll make it a public rigid body. And then we are going to say our body dot move position our body move position our body dot position plus movement multiplied by time dot delta time. Cool. And we're going to slap that onto our player. And then we're going to put a rigid body on him. And we are going to set the gravity scale to 0 because we don't want him to fall. And we're going to drag that in here. And we're going to start. And so, see, we can move him now. Moves pretty slowly. We can use the arrow keys or WSAD to move him. And so, why are we able to do that? Is because we are taking input get axis raw, horizontal, and vertical. And what that means is in your input manager, you go to project settings, input, axis, horizontal, and vertical. This is what we're calling here. So you can see that the negative button is left, the positive button is right, alternate negative button is A, D. So if I got rid of these, then using WSAD or left arrow keys to move around wouldn't work. So you can set this to what you want, but for our project we're just gonna set it as the default. We've probably noticed that the player moves really slow, right? So let's add a public float and call this speed. And we're going to multiply this by speed. And we're going to go and wait for it to compile. And we're going to change speed to like 2 or something. And see, we're much faster now. We can put even more faster. And now we're super fast. Wow. Alright, so we have player movement, but this still doesn't look right. Shouldn't the character like turn the direction that they're facing and whatnot? And so let's do that next. So we're going to add an animator controller to this guy. And then we need to create the actual controller, so let's just make a new folder, call it animators. We'll create a new animator controller and call it player controller. Then we'll drag that in here. Alright, so now that we have our animator, we're going to create a new blend tree. We'll call this one idle. And we're going to create another blend tree. And then we'll call this one walking. Then we're just going to double click here. And you see that there's not really that much going on. Because we need to create a couple of parameters. And we're going to create 3 parameters. We'll call this one input dot underscore x. It's going to be a float, and you got to make sure that it's a float and not an integer. So we'll create another float. Call it input underscore y. and this will be tracking our X and Y movement. So this will let us know which direction we should be facing. And then we're going to create another Boolean, and call this one is walking. And this will let us know if our character should be walking or if they should be an idle. Alright, so we have our blend tree here, but it's not much going on. And we're going to set our 1D blend type to 2D simple directional. And we're going to need to set our parameters from blend to input X and then input Y. And then we're going to add a bunch of motion fields. And you'll see this thing pop up once you have 2. And because we have 4 directions that we can move in, we need 4. And basically, you see here, I can move this up and down. And we're going to need to set this up in such a way that it looks something like this, but we're going to be editing the values directly. And so, before we get into this part, let's actually set up our animations. So let's go back. And we're going to be creating the animations right now. And so we're going to create a new clip. And we're going to need 8 clips. 1 running for each direction and then 1 idle for each direction. So that's 4 plus 4, 8 directions. I'm probably going to skip through this part, but I'll show you how to do 1, and then once you know how to do 1, you know how to do all the other ones. So let's do our idle first. Let's name it in such a way that we understand what it is. So let's say what the animation is, so the idle, and then let's actually probably put the character first. So let's say, well, my character is Link, so we'll put Link idle, and then the direction he's facing, so let's say forward. Alright, so we have the actual file of the animation, but there's nothing here yet. So we're going to go into my sprite sheet and then find his idle animation for forward, and that's what it is here. So we're gonna, we need to click on GFX first. So you see I was getting that error because I didn't have my GFX selected. And to see if it worked, you're gonna play it, and you see him doing his thing here. Alright, now do that for every direction that you have, and I'll see you in a bit. But before I do that, I forgot to mention, I usually like to drop the sample size from 60 to 12 because 60 is super fast, 60 frames per second. You probably want to lower it depending on what you're doing, but just know that the higher the number is, the faster the animation is going to be. And so make sure if you don't want it to be super fast, make sure you drop this number down. Alright, we are back with all of our animations completed, all of his idles and all of his walks. So you have 8 files now, and you can see that I created them and they're all here, but we actually don't need them in our animator here. So we can delete all these. And we're going to double click idle and go to our blend tree. Alright, so we're back to this, and basically we're going to set our idles to these motions here. So you can imagine this red dot is our character, or not our character, but the direction that we're going in. And so if our red dot reaches here, then we're going to be looking forward. So we're going to set this to 1, position Y to 1, and then position X to 0. Alright, so we set this to 0, 1, and that means that we're going up, which means that our character, we're going to be seeing his back. So we're going to take our link idle back and set it to this one. And we're going to do the same thing for all the other ones. I'm going to click on this one, see what this is. We're going to set this, its x value to -1, and its y to 0. So this is if we're going left. So we're going to set this to link idle left. Do the same thing here. We're going right. We're going to be using whole numbers. So we're going to set this to 0. Our y position is going to be 0. But our x position is going to be 1. And we're going to be moving right. And then last but not least, our x is 0, and then our y is -1. And we're going to be moving down, so our position is going to be link idle forward. And there we have it. And so if we're going left, it's going to activate this idle. If we're going right, it's going to activate this one. Going down, it's going to activate this one, etc. Then we're going to delete our walking. We're going to copy our idle, hit Control C, Control V, and it's going to copy it. And we're basically just going to modify these values. So instead of idle, we're just going to replace them all with walking. So we're going to take the back one, set it to the back. We're going to take the front, there, left, and right. So basically I'm just replacing the idle direction with walking. And that way it's just much faster to do than just doing all of it by scratch. Alright, so how do we get from idle to, well, let's rename this to walking. How do we go from idle to walking? Well, we're going to create a transition here. And basically, we're going to create a condition. And we're going to do is walking true. So if is walking is true, then we're going to instead go to this blend tree. And if is walking is false, we're going to go back to this blend tree. And we're going to take off the exit time so that way that we can transition from idle to walking instantly. Alright, so now that we have that all set up, we just have to do a little bit of coding. Just a little bit. So we're going to open up our script. And we're going to check if our movement vector 2 is equal or is not equal to vector 2 0. So basically this means that if our vector 2 is not 0, basically means that if we are moving, what do we want to do if we're moving? Well, we need to actually make a public animator called anim. And let's just set the reference real quick. Let's go to our player. And you see our anim here. We're going to drag our GFX. Alright, now we have access to the animator. So we're going to go anim. We're going to say dot set bool. So remember, we're not moving now. So what are we going to do? Is walking is now equal to true. So our parameter is walking here is now true, which means that it can transition from idle into walking. So what else are we going to do? Well, we can do anim.setFloat. So remember we have these two float variables. Input underscore x movement dot x. Let me show you a quick little shortcut. We're going to hit Control D. It's going to duplicate that. I'm just going to change the x to y. And this is going to be tracking our X and Y axis. So this will tell the input.x or input_x to be whatever value it should be. So last but not least, we are going to need to transition back into idle, right? Because we transitioned into walking, but how do we go back to not walking? Well, we already know when we're walking. That means that the opposite of that is going to be when we're not walking. So we can just do an else statement. And we're just going to do the same shortcut. Control D. And then we're going to hold on to Alt and hit down to move this down. And I have a little space right here underneath my anim.set bool, and I don't like that. And instead of hitting backspace, I'm just going to hit Control X. It's going to get rid of that. And so instead of true, we're going to set this to false. And that's all we need for our scripts, actually. And so let's go back into our game. Let's see if this works. We're going to hit the play. We move around and see that when we move in the direction, he's going to also move in the direction, or he's going to face towards that direction. And so let's make him a little faster. I'm going to make it a speed. Move the camera in so you guys can see better, and there you go. Now he's moving in the direction that we wanted to, and that's all we needed. Alright, so that's it for this episode, and I'll see you guys next time. Alright guys, so let's end the video. I'd like to thank my patrons Bay, Emerson, Kirijo, Polybius, and Yoan. Thanks for being my Patreon. You can be a patron too if you go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/devbird. There you can become a patron and send me messages and I'll reply. So used to be that you need to be a patron to get into my Discord, but I decided to just make it open to everyone. So I have a link in the description, and so just join Discord, and that's about it. See you guys later.